Every morning, before the world fully awakens, a subtle battle begins within the human soul. It is the battle between clarity and confusion, between purpose and distraction, between the higher self that seeks meaning and the lower impulses that drift without direction. The first moments of the day, though often unnoticed, carry a hidden weight, for they set the tone by which the rest of our hours will be colored. A mind clouded at dawn rarely finds brightness at noon. A heart unfocused at sunrise struggles to regain its compass at nightfall. Maimonides understood this inner struggle with profound precision. He believed that the human being stands perpetually between two paths, one leading upward, toward understanding, intentionality, and alignment with truth, and another leading downward toward impulsiveness, confusion, and a life governed by circumstance rather than choice. To him, the essential question of every morning is not merely what tasks await us, but who we will be as we face them. Modern life intensifies this dilemma. The moment we open our eyes, noise calls to us. Notifications, obligations, and anxieties crowd the mind before it has even breathed in the new day. Many begin their mornings reacting, not reflecting. Instead of shaping the day shapes them. Instead of directing their minds are carried away by distractions. This is the condition Maimonides would describe as living externally rather than internally, allowing the outer chaos to dictate the inner world. And yet, buried beneath this turbulence lies the longing for clarity. Human beings do not want to drift. They do not wish to live without purpose. They yearn to understand themselves, to act with intention, to feel that their lives correspond to something meaningful, ordered, and true. Each morning, the soul quietly asks, "What should I hold today? What principles ought to guide me? What matters most in the limited span of time I have?" Maimonides believed that wisdom is not found in sudden revelations, but in daily discipline, in simple but profound reflections, repeated until they shape the character. Just as the body requires nourishment each morning to function, the mind and soul require orientation. Without it, the human being becomes like a ship without a compass, moved not by choice, but by the shifting winds of habit and emotion. In this teaching lies the essence of the human dilemma. We desire clarity, yet we begin our days in distraction. We long for purpose, yet we rush into activity without first aligning ourselves with truth. We instinctively seek meaning, yet we rarely pause to awaken the inner faculties that make meaning possible. Thus the question becomes urgent. How does a person begin the day, not with confusion, but with awareness, not with anxiety, but with steadiness, not with randomness, but with intention? For Maimonides, the answer begins with reflection, deliberate, focused, rational contemplation. He believed that the morning is the time when the mind is closest to its original purity, before the noise of the day disturbs it, before desires gain strength, before external demands cloud judgment. To begin the day well is to reclaim the sovereignty of the intellect, to remind oneself of what is real and essential, to elevate the mind toward the principles that enable wisdom. But such reflection must be rooted in something deeper than generic positivity or vague spirituality. Maimonides insisted that the foundation of daily clarity lies in truth. Truth about the world, about the self, and about the Creator. A person who knows the order of things walks with a steady mind. One who understands the purpose of living does not collapse under minor disturbances. One who contemplates their place in the universe begins the day with humility, gratitude, and orientation. He taught that the human being is composed of many forces, reason, emotion, desire, imagination, and that each morning these forces must be gently guided toward harmony. If desire leads, the day is lost to impulses. If imagination rules, the day is consumed by illusions. If emotion dominates, the day becomes reactive. But if reason leads, calm, clear, elevated, Then the other faculties fall into their proper roles and life becomes aligned with purpose. Thus, the morning becomes a moment of decision. Will we allow the lower impulses to seize control, or will we consciously incline ourselves toward the path of wisdom? Will we be governed by external noise or internal understanding? Will we drift or will we direct? This is why the greatest thinkers, Maimonides included, viewed the early hours of the day as sacred, not in the ceremonial sense, but in the existential sense. The morning is a doorway through which the soul passes into the world of action. How we cross that doorway determines the quality of our steps. In this spirit, Maimonides left us not merely with commandments or philosophical systems, but with reflections, powerful yet simple thoughts that anchor the mind and lift the heart. These reflections are not meant to be recited mechanically. They are meant to be lived, absorbed slowly, and integrated into one's way of being. Each one is a small light against the darkness of confusion. Each one is a lens that sharpens perception, guiding the soul back to its path. The human dilemma, then, is the tension between our highest potential and our immediate tendencies, between wisdom and impulse, between the desire to rise and the inertia that pulls us downward. Morning is when this tension is clearest, but it is also the moment of greatest opportunity. For the person who begins their day with clarity can sustain clarity throughout the hours that follow. And the one who begins with purpose can transform ordinary actions into meaningful steps toward the good. Maimonides invites us to step into each morning with consciousness, with understanding, and with the wisdom of those who know that the first moments of the day contain the seeds of the entire day. In the following reflections, we will explore 5 guiding thoughts derived from the teachings of Maimonides, reflections that illuminate the path toward clarity and purpose, and that allow the human being to begin each day not by reacting, but by choosing, not by drifting, but by living intentionally. To understand how to begin the day with clarity and purpose, we must look carefully at how Maimonides viewed the human mind, the human soul, and the order of existence. His teachings were not abstract speculations detached from life. They were precise instruments designed to guide the individual toward a life governed by wisdom, responsibility, and inner harmony. For Maimonides, mornings were not merely chronological events, but philosophical opportunities, moments in which the intellect could reclaim its place as the leader of the human being. He begins with a fundamental principle. Every human action is preceded by a preceding act of thought. When thought is clear, action becomes noble. When thought is cloudy, action becomes confused. This is why, in his medical writings and philosophical works, he repeatedly emphasizes the cultivation of reason as the first task of each day. The mind must be awakened before the body moves. The governing faculty must be oriented before emotional or physical impulses take shape. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides describes the intellect as the lamp of the soul, fragile yet luminous, easily dimmed by distraction, yet capable of illuminating the deepest truths when protected and nourished. He warns that the intellect can be overwhelmed by the noise of imagination and desire if the individual does not actively prepare the mind for understanding. This preparation begins at dawn. The early hours offer a clarity not available later, for the mind is not yet burdened by external demands or internal agitation. Maimonides insists that human beings do not naturally incline toward clarity. Our default state is not wisdom, but confusion. We are born with powerful drives, vivid imaginations, and a tendency to pursue immediate pleasure over long-term good. Reason, on the other hand, must be cultivated, strengthened, sharpened through conscious effort. This is why he viewed the morning as a time for intellectual alignment, a quiet moment when the rational faculty can be reaffirmed as the guiding force of the self. How did he suggest we do this? Not through mystical rituals, but through structured reflection grounded in truth. Truth, for Maimonides, is not merely factual accuracy, it is alignment with the order of reality. the understanding of what exists, why it exists, and how the human being fits within the structure of creation. To reflect on truth is to awaken the mind to the principles that govern existence, and when the mind perceives order, the soul finds peace. His first step toward morning clarity is the cultivation of humility. In Mishneh Torah, he writes that a wise person begins the day with an awareness of their place in the universe, finite, dependent, yet capable of rising through understanding. Humility is not self-negation, but the recognition that one's life participates in a greater whole. This recognition dissolves much of the anxiety that arises from self-centered thinking. By placing oneself within the vastness of creation, one gains perspective and steadiness. The second step is gratitude, which Maimonides considered rational before emotional. He believed that to be alive, conscious, and capable of thought is an extraordinary opportunity. Gratitude is not merely a feeling, it is an intellectual acknowledgement that existence itself is a gift. When one begins the day with gratitude, the mind becomes less reactive, more receptive, and more inclined toward reasoned action. Gratitude sharpens clarity by preventing the distortions caused by entitlement and dissatisfaction. The third step is intentionality. In his ethical treatise, 8 chapters, Maimonides teaches that actions devoid of intention lose their moral and spiritual meaning. He writes that one must reflect, before engaging in the activities of the day, on the purpose of each action: to maintain health, to earn livelihood, to build relationships, to pursue knowledge, to seek justice. By clarifying intention, a person elevates even the simplest tasks into expressions of conscious living. Intention transforms routine into purpose. He also believed that emotions must be disciplined through rational contemplation. Emotional states, he argued, are not fixed. They can be guided, moderated, and shaped by the intellect. Morning reflection allows the individual to examine their emotional state before it governs their behavior. If sadness arises, reflect on its cause. If anxiety appears, measure it against the truth of one's capacities. If anger surfaces, realign it with reason. Maimonides taught that emotions are not to be suppressed, but understood, and through understanding, harmonized. Another essential morning reflection, derived from the guide, is the contemplation of the unity and order of the universe. Maimonides believed that the highest form of human flourishing comes from contemplating the wisdom embedded in creation. He did not mean that one must perform metaphysical analysis at dawn, but that the human being should begin the day with a sense of order, recognizing that existence is not chaotic, but purposeful. When the mind internalizes this order, the soul becomes more capable of navigating the confusion of daily life. He also taught that self-discipline is achieved not through force, but through gradual alignment. One must incline oneself little by little toward the middle path, neither excessive nor deficient in any trait. This doctrine of the golden mean is essential for morning reflection, because it teaches that clarity is not an extreme state, but a balanced state. To begin the day well is to aim for equilibrium between action and rest, speech and silence, work and contemplation. Balance produces strength, imbalance produces distress. In his medical writings, Maimonides argues that the condition of the body influences the clarity of the mind. Morning habits that harm the body, irregular sleep, overeating, neglecting movement, cloud the intellect. Thus, he saw physical discipline as part of spiritual and philosophical discipline. A clear mind requires a cared-for body. The person who honors their physical nature honors the divine wisdom that structured it. Taken together, these principles form the core of Maimonides' approach to beginning the day with intention and clarity. They are not esoteric teachings reserved for scholars, but universal reflections accessible to all. They ask us to pause before rushing into activity, to awaken the mind before engaging the world, to align ourselves with truth before we attempt to shape our lives. Through humility, gratitude, intention, emotional understanding, contemplation of order and physical discipline, the human being performs an act of quiet inner calibration, preparing the intellect to lead and the soul to follow. This is how Maimonides believed the day should begin, with conscious reflection, grounded in reason, illuminated by understanding, and elevated by the awareness of one's place in creation. These teachings form the foundation of the 5 reflections that will soon be presented, not as abstract ideas, but as guiding lights for daily living. To understand how Maimonides' reflections can illuminate the first moments of the day, one must grasp the profound synthesis he forged between the realms of faith and reason. His greatness lies not only in his mastery of philosophy or his depth of religious insight, but in the way he seamlessly united them into a single path of spiritual clarity. For him, there was no conflict between understanding and devotion, between intellectual rigor and reverence, between contemplating the world and drawing nearer to its creator. The path of truth, he insisted, is one. This unity forms the essence of morning reflection. For when the human being rises from sleep, the soul stands on the threshold between confusion and clarity. In that delicate space, Maimonides teaches us to bring together the highest faculties of the mind and the deepest stirrings of the heart. Morning is not merely a time to prepare for tasks. It is a quiet ascent, a movement from unconsciousness toward consciousness, from darkness toward understanding. And this ascent mirrors the spiritual journey of the human soul. In sleep, the human being is passive. The intellect rests, the imagination wanders, the body drifts through its instinctive rhythms. But upon waking, one is given a renewed opportunity, a chance to restore the governance of reason and to elevate the inner life. Maimonides viewed this daily awakening as symbolic of a deeper spiritual truth, the soul's ability to rise from confusion toward enlightenment. This process is gradual, deliberate, and intimately tied to the unification of thought and devotion. The reflections that guide the beginning of the day must therefore cultivate both clarity of mind and an awakened awareness of the divine order that permeates existence. For Maimonides, the highest form of worship is not emotional ecstasy, but understanding, a deep, contemplative engagement with truth. To contemplate the nature of reality, the structure of creation, and the laws that govern the world is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a spiritual act, an expression of reverence. Through knowledge, the soul draws nearer to God. Yet Maimonides also recognized that reason alone cannot sustain the fullness of the human spirit. Knowledge provides the form, but devotion provides the fire. The intellect seeks understanding, but the heart seeks alignment. To begin the day with clarity, one must engage both. A purely intellectual morning leaves the soul dry. A purely emotional morning leaves the mind unfocused. Harmony arises only when the human being unites the two, when thought becomes reverent and devotion becomes intelligent. This synthesis is the key to transforming morning reflections into living wisdom. Each reflection becomes a bridge connecting the inner life to the world outside and the world outside to the deeper order of creation. The mind contemplates truth and the heart responds with humility, gratitude, and purpose. In this way, reflection becomes not an isolated ritual, but a preparation for action, grounded in understanding. To illustrate this spiritual synthesis, Maimonides often used the metaphor of light. The intellect is a lamp, fragile yet powerful, capable of illuminating the path of life. But the lamp requires oil, and the oil is devotion. Without devotion, the flame burns weakly. Without intellect, the flame is directionless. When the two are united, light becomes steady and strong. Morning reflection, then, is the moment when the lamp is lit for the day ahead. The 5 reflections derived from Maimonides' teachings operate on this principle. Each one speaks simultaneously to the mind and the soul. Each one grounds the individual in reality while lifting them toward higher purpose. Each one calls the person to see the world not merely as a collection of tasks, but as a structured, meaningful realm in which every action, thought, and emotion can serve a greater good. The first reflection, rooted in humility, reminds the individual that they are part of a universe vast and ordered. This thought quiets the ego and opens the heart to gratitude. The second reflection, centered on intention, aligns the intellect with purpose, transforming every action into a conscious act. The third reflection brings the emotions into harmony with reason, allowing the soul to move throughout the day without being swept away by impulse. The fourth reflection contemplates the order and unity of creation, elevating the mind toward the divine. And the fifth reflection calls the individual to balance, the equilibrium that lies at the heart of Maimonides' ethical philosophy. These reflections are not meant to be recited mechanically. They are meant to be lived, to be allowed to slowly permeate the consciousness until they shape one's way of moving through the world. In this sense, Maimonides' approach to reflection is deeply practical. He's not interested in abstract piety or empty rituals. He seeks the transformation of the individual, a transformation achieved through daily, deliberate engagement with truth. This engagement has a profound spiritual effect. When the mind begins the day with clarity, it becomes more attuned to the subtle wisdom embedded in the world. When the heart begins the day with humility and gratitude, it becomes less reactive to adversity and more receptive to moments of quiet blessing. When one contemplates the order of creation, chaos loses its power. When one aligns intention with purpose, even small actions acquire dignity. This integration is the essence of spiritual maturity. In Maimonides' view, the ultimate purpose of human life is the intellectual and moral perfection of the soul, the gradual purification of thought and the refinement of character until the human being becomes attuned to truth in all things. Morning reflection is the first step of this lifelong journey. It is the moment when the individual chooses to rise above instinct, distraction, and confusion, and instead anchor themselves in wisdom. But Maimonides also stressed that this path does not demand extraordinary revelations or ascetic practices. It demands consistency. The human being is shaped not by occasional moments of inspiration, but by daily habits of thought. Morning reflections are powerful because they are repeated. Each day, the same thoughts carve deeper pathways in the mind. Each day, the soul becomes a little more aligned with truth. Each day, clarity becomes more natural, and purpose becomes more instinctive. Through this slow, steady refinement, the human being becomes capable of experiencing what Maimonides called the love of God. Not a sentimental emotion, but an intellectual appreciation of the divine wisdom manifest in all things. In this love, the mind finds peace and the soul finds direction. And from this peace and direction, the actions of the day flow naturally. Thus, the 5 reflections that guide the beginning of the day are more than philosophical principles. They are spiritual anchors, intellectual instruments, and pathways toward inner harmony. They unite the highest capacities of the human being, reason, emotion, imagination, and devotion, into a single purposeful movement toward the good. This is the heart of Maimonides' spiritual synthesis, the union of clarity and reverence, the integration of intellect and soul, the transformation of daily life into a meaningful journey through truth. Maimonides never intended wisdom to remain in the realm of contemplation alone. For him, the true measure of understanding is its capacity to shape life, to guide action, and to transform the inner world of a person into conduct worthy of their human dignity. His philosophy is not a system of abstract principles, but a path, a living discipline that elevates the mind and steadies the heart. And so the 5 reflections derived from his teachings serve not only as ideas, but as practical guides for beginning the day with clarity and purpose. Each morning becomes an opportunity to choose the direction of one's inner life. Whether or not one can control external events, one can always govern the posture of the soul, the orientation of the mind, and the intention behind each step. The goal is not perfection, but alignment, a quiet harmony between the inner faculties and the deeper order that Maimonides believed permeates the universe. The first reflection is humility, a recognition of one's place within creation. Practically, this means taking a few moments each morning to acknowledge the vastness of the world and the limitations of one's own power. This is not an act of self-negation, but of clarity. By contemplating the grandeur of existence, the cycles of nature, the complexity of life, the long chain of wisdom that preceded us, the ego softens and anxiety diminishes. The person begins the day not with the burden of carrying the world, but with the peace of participating in it. Humility makes room for clarity because it removes the distortions created by excessive self-concern. The second reflection is gratitude, approached not as mere sentiment, but as a rational recognition of the gift of existence. In practical terms, this means reflecting on the simple yet profound reality of being alive, the ability to think, to choose, to act, to grow. Gratitude shifts the mind from deficiency towards sufficiency, from agitation towards steadiness. A grateful mind is less reactive, less vulnerable to the frustrations of the day, and more capable of perceiving opportunities for good. Maimonides believed that gratitude strengthens the intellect, because it removes the emotional fog that clouds judgment. The third reflection is intention. Before engaging with obligations, messages, or activity, one pauses to clarify the purpose behind the day's actions. Maimonides taught that intention elevates even ordinary tasks. Eating becomes nourishment, work becomes service, conversation becomes connection, rest becomes restoration. When one acts without intention, life becomes fragmented. When one acts with intention, life becomes coherent. This reflection helps the individual ensure that the coming hours are not merely filled, but directed, aligned with values rather than impulses. The fourth reflection concerns emotional discipline. Maimonides did not advocate the suppression of emotion, but its understanding and guidance. Each morning, one examines the emotional state that has arisen from the night. If there is worry, one seeks its source and measures it against reality. If there is resentment, one considers whether it arises from wounded pride or genuine injustice. If there is fear, one confronts whether it is based on imagination or fact. This moment of examination allows the intellect to reclaim leadership over the emotions. Throughout the day, the individual becomes less reactive, more measured, more capable of responding with wisdom rather than impulse. The fifth reflection is the contemplation of order, the awareness that the universe is structured, purposeful, and governed by wisdom. Practically, this means spending a few quiet moments considering that life is not chaos, even when events appear confusing. There is an underlying harmony that can be sensed by the mind that seeks it. This contemplation does not require mystical vision. It requires stillness, reason, and openness. When one perceives order, the fear of uncertainty diminishes. One begins the day with steadiness, knowing that one participates in a reality that is coherent and meaningful. Together, these 5 reflections form the Maimonidean method for awakening the soul each morning. They do not require long rituals, dramatic changes, or esoteric techniques. They require only presence, a willingness to pause, to think, and to align. Their power lies in their consistency. If practiced daily, they reshape the character, mold the intellect, and refine the emotional world of the individual. How then does one integrate these reflections into modern life? Begin with simplicity. Dedicate the first moments of the day to quiet thought, before engaging with the world. Sit, breathe, and allow the mind to rise gently from sleep. Then move through the reflections, one by one, not as obligations but as invitations. Humility, gratitude, intention, emotional understanding, contemplation of order. With time, they become natural, instinctive and transformative. Maimonides teaches that the human soul becomes what it repeatedly contemplates. A person who begins each day with clarity gradually becomes clear-minded. One who begins with gratitude becomes more resilient. One who begins with intention becomes purposeful. One who begins with emotional discipline becomes steady. One who begins with the contemplation of order becomes wiser, calmer, and more capable of navigating the uncertainties of life. This daily practice aligns with Maimonides' larger vision of human flourishing, a life governed by reason, elevated by understanding, and grounded in moral clarity. It is not a path toward perfection, but toward integration. When the intellect leads, the emotions find balance. When the emotions are balanced, actions become just. When actions are just, the soul becomes peaceful. And when the soul becomes peaceful, the human being draws closer to what Maimonides understood as the ultimate aim of life, the love of God through understanding. Beginning the day with these reflections allows the individual to live each day as a step toward this ultimate aim, not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency, in the way one speaks, listens, works, rests, and responds to the world. Clarity becomes not a distant ideal, but a lived reality. Purpose becomes not an aspiration, but a daily companion. And life, even in its challenges, becomes guided by the steady light of wisdom. Maimonides invites us to embrace this path, not only for the sake of inner serenity, but for the sake of the world around us. A person who begins the day with clarity acts with kindness. A person who begins with humility diffuses conflict. A person who begins with gratitude brings healing. A person who begins with intention elevates those around them. And a person who begins with the contemplation of order becomes a presence of stability in a world often clouded by confusion. Thus, the 5 reflections are more than a morning discipline. They are a way of living, a way of embodying the harmony Maimonides saw at the center of creation. Through them, the day becomes not a series of tasks, but a journey through meaning, and life becomes a quiet ascent toward wisdom, compassion, and truth.